The New Orleans Saints. Not a ton to say narrative-wise. Basically, the same thing that has happened to them the last 3 years. Just a super talented roster that didn't make it far in the playoffs. I'm not going to get too much into that. I want to more talk about why, of course, and what they look like going forward. But yeah, really similar story to what you've seen from the Saints for a long time now. As far as my bets on them, I was okay and not so okay. So 20-21 total, or 20-22, which obviously really, really, really bad. But that was almost exclusively because of my over/under bets with them. For some reason, I was 3-11 as far as the over/unders of their games went that I bet on, and a large part of it was consistently I was taking unders, and they would go over, and I was really overestimating the ability of their defense to get stops in the red zone, and I was overestimating probably the amount of time that the Saints would dominate possession in games, because a lot of my thinking was, well, the way they play offense, they're going to have the ball so much that it's going to be hard for the other team to put up a ton of points, and even the Saints themselves. Didn't really end up being the case, and actually it's really interesting case study into what causes games to go over or under that I think I probably learned a lot from. But yeah, so not great for the Saints, but again, I mean, you could do a lot worse than that, especially with spread stuff. I was all wins 9-4, all that stuff. So yeah, position by position, what they have going into the offseason. And they're not in a horrible spot. They're not in a great spot either, but not horrible. So start with the quarterback, of course. Drew Brees probably retired. Don't believe it's official yet, but close to officials, I would imagine. Will be before the announcement. And listen, Drew Brees, I'm not going to say he didn't have it anymore the last couple of years, but he was the cause of some of their offensive struggles, especially later in the season and in the playoffs. People talk about Teddy Bridgewater being unwilling to push the ball down the field. Drew Brees really, really wasn't. I mean, that's actually what was happening there. He's just completely unwilling to look past 5 yards down the field the vast majority of the time, outside when he was playing really bad defenses like the Lions earlier in the year or the Falcons when they played them. Not that did a whole lot in those games either, but yeah, that really was a limit for their offense, and I think Sean Payton probably knew that, especially by the end of the season with the Taysom Hill stuff. Not that worked great either, but yeah, Drew Brees, obviously, top 5 guy, whatever, all time. You can argue about that, what the exact number is. I don't much care, but they're gonna miss him for sure. So then you got Jameis Winston, who. Listen, that guy should not be starting in the NFL. He's really, really bad. And yes, I am 100% sure that his production, he threw 30 interceptions, his numbers that he put up in Tampa Bay was a result of Bruce Arians and the offense he was playing in. He's really bad. Taysom Hill, of course, a lot more interesting to talk about. Also not good. While it's interesting and I think a fun distraction to see what the offense looks like with him at quarterback, truth is, the Saints are not going anywhere with him. He's really, really bad as an actual pocket passer. Not NFL quality, even close. He's below guys like even Nick Mullins, stuff like that. And as a runner, while it's effective to a point, without significant amounts of tries against bad teams, it wasn't very good. The example mostly I'm pointing to there being the Broncos, where they were playing, just a fake NFL offense on the other side of the ball. I mean, as far as with quarterback, Taysom Hill, all you have is a player that on a stacked roster can beat really bad teams, but is not a useful player against any real team. I think even against not so great teams like the Eagles, obviously they lost to late in the year with Taysom Hill. Not a lot there as far as a real franchise or any meaningful starting snap quarterback goes. At running back, real quick, Alvin Kamara is still one of the running backs who really, really matters. He showed that it was definitely injury the year prior when he wasn't quite as explosive as everybody's expecting from him, given his track record. But yeah, definitely was the injury. He's still incredibly good. Now, is he a top 2-3 guy? No, I never really thought he was. Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, both pretty clearly better. But I mean, you're not gonna. There's no point in trying to do better than Alvin Kamara. He's more than good enough to do everything you need to win at any football game you play in. Latavius Murray, too, really good. He doesn't necessarily matter as far as, turning drives into touchdowns. Outside of, and that does not mean goal line carries. That's not actually that useful of a skill. Yeah, so you're fine, though, at running back between those two. You're definitely fine. At receiver, a lot of injury problems throughout the year, COVID absences, that type of thing. But if they bring everybody back, I mean, again, especially in this offense, they found guys who are really good for them and are going to work out depending on who their quarterback is. If it's Jameis Winston, maybe we'd have to take a second look at that. But Michael Thomas still, I don't know, probably best receiver. Second, Devontae Adams best. So second best receiver in the NFL. Really, really good. Extremely useful. Showed that when he's on the field. He is pretty much the only receiver who's not super fast who makes up for it in a really meaningful way. And yeah, I don't want to talk about him too much. You kind of know what you get with Michael Thomas. Emmanuel Sanders, so they just released him, and I get it with the contract he was on. And depending on, which direction they're going this year, again, I do get it. But he was really good, really, really good for them. Now, his numbers, especially at the beginning of the year, were disappointing. But a lot of that had to do with, I think, the teams that they're playing against being vulnerable in ways that the Saints didn't necessarily need to lean on Emmanuel Sanders. But if you actually watched him, he was consistently getting open, as he has his whole career. And he makes a lot of drives turn into touchdowns. And you saw that. I don't know exactly how many he had. Maybe it was 8, 9. But given the amount of games he missed, and again, the offense that he's playing in, the way they operate in the red zone, especially with that Taysom Hill stuff, I mean, he's really, really good. And whatever team he goes to now, despite his age, still really good. Not worried about him being extremely productive or useful, at least. And yeah, that's Emmanuel Sanders. Though the other guys on their roster, like I said, I do think for their offense are good. Marquez Callaway especially did show that as a bigger-bodied slot receiver, he's good enough to operate your offense through. Probably not, definitely not an elite level, but you're not ever going to ask him to do that. So they have something there. And the big one, I mentioned Traequan Smith real quick. He's fine. I actually think he gets a little bit underrated as people are like, this sneaky guy on the Saints. Well, I don't know if he's sneaky. He's a third-round pick who has played a ton of snaps in his career, outside of when he's been injured. And he's good. He does create okay separation. Now, he does have some notable issues with just being a weak player, like at the catch point, that type of thing. But I think you're definitely useful, or you have something with him. He's a NFL-level receiver. But yeah, what I was going to mention, the big one, is Deontay Harris. So that guy is extremely explosive, one of the better weapons in the entire NFL. You saw that, especially when he's getting consistent stats. Now, he's shown it the whole time this whole year before he was really getting super involved in the offense, whether that be on the punt returns or when he did get some gadget plays. He's really good. And if they're smart, they're going to use him a whole lot more going forward. I mean, he's everything that back when Taysom Hill was drafted, they thought they were getting there. As far as these gadget players, he's probably the best in the NFL, almost certainly. And even compared to Taysom Hill, Deontay Harris just does everything. He looks different, but he does everything Taysom Hill is supposed to do, except for throw the ball, which Taysom Hill don't do well anyway, really effectively. So they absolutely got something there. And at tight end, Jared Cook also cut. That one's I'm more okay with. Jared Cook was still pretty good, and given the lack of super elite tight ends, he actually is one of the few in the NFL who can create separation for himself, which again, by far most useful skill for a receiver. And not a terrible blocker either. And I get why they cut him again, but they probably would miss him. You would kind of see just an overall talent drain, given him and Emmanuel Sanders leaving, depending on who's at quarterback. So we'll see, how that ends up operating. But there are other guys there. Josh Hill, really, really mediocre replacement level, doesn't do anything that pretty much any other NFL tight end would do for you, so don't really care there. And Adam Troutman, I know a lot of people are excited for him. I did think he showed some okay things, and if he's going into next year as your starter, you're probably not in a terrible situation, but again, am I convinced that he does anything I care about for your offense? No, not really. But not terrible, I will say. And he did show some nice things, especially as a downfield receiver, locating balls at the catch point. Not that that's a super useful skill, but it's something. Then you get the offensive line. Not quite as elite as they have been before. Now, their tackles still were, especially when they were healthy. Teron Armstead, Ryan Ramczyk, when they're healthy again. Probably outside of the Cowboys, the best tackle duo in the league. Ryan Ramczyk, the single best tackle in the league. But they do have injuries. Specifically Teron Armstead. So we'll see how that goes going forward, but am I necessarily worried about that? No. Interior, a lot more to talk about. You got Eric McCoy, who continued to be productive in his sophomore year. Not super elite, especially with his movement skills. But he is good enough, and frankly, I think that specific skill set gets really overrated for centers, unless you're in a specific offense, be it the Vikings or the 49ers or something like that. The ability to move 30 yards down the field quickly isn't necessarily all that useful for a center. So while Eric McCoy doesn't have that, I do think in this offense, you're set there for sure. Andrew Pete, I think, gets underrated also, being his contract's a little big and he's a first rounder, plus the injury issues. When he's on the field, he actually is pretty good. Now, he does have some bad loss issues at times, but with him at guard, if he stays healthy, you can do worse in the NFL, so I'm not necessarily worried about that either. The other spot, though, maybe not so much. So they cut Larry Warford going into the year, which was fine. He was absolutely the weak link of the Saints offensive line last year. And with first-round pick Cesar Ruiz, I'm not going to roast them for that part. But what I will roast them for is the selection of Cesar Ruiz. The point, theoretically, especially when they drafted him, of drafting interior offensive linemen in the first round, is that he's going to be good right away. And Cesar Ruiz really was not. He barely cleared mediocre. A whole lot of guards, even in that draft, that played that were pretty notably better than him. So am I excited for him going forward, even his potential? Not really. He didn't really show anything almost ever that made me say, yeah, he has it. He just has to put some stuff together. Do I think he's going to be terrible in his career? No, but I can pretty much already say, as far as a first-round interior offensive lineman, not what you want. Not what you want, but not a disaster if that's where they go. So, going to the offseason offensively really depends on what they do at quarterback, because while they have talent at receiver, running back, and with the tackles they have, hard to go wrong, their offense could get a lot worse really quickly with the talent drain. Like I said, losing Emmanuel Sanders, Jared Cook, and if they get a much worse quarterback, especially if they bring back Jameis Winston, then we'll see. We'll see about that. A bit more to be excited though on the defensive end, and on that side of the ball, yeah, the Saints, they're getting older, and if their offense starts to fall off, you can see that some of the defense problems, especially they got exposed in the beginning of the season, they could get worse, because we were talking about, like I said, an aging defense who's going to be letting guys go and doesn't necessarily have a lot of young talent to step up. So position by position on the defensive line. Now, they do still have some real players there, specifically Cam Jordan and David Onyemata, both elite guys. Maybe not – they're not like top 5 guys at this point. Cam Jordan, a little bit older and doesn't offer the same pass rushing wins that, the Watt brothers do, or – somebody like that, but is still, maybe the best run defending edge in the NFL, and is still a really good pass rush to go on top of it. So you got something there. David Onyemata, though, like I said, that guy really underrated as an interior defensive player. Legitimately matters. Actually causes disruption in the backfield consistently, even as a pass rusher. Really something there. In fact, he got a player we'll talk about later single-handedly is going to get him paid about $40 million more than he should be making. But other guys on the interior start with Malcolm Brown, Malcolm Roach, Shai Tuttle. Varying levels of success. They rotated in and out a lot, not just in-game, but game to game, kind of who was going to get snaps. And none of them were super impressive, but I do think, Malcolm Brown, older, more of a veteran, and is a good nose tackle, actually, I do think, and is more than useful enough to keep around. But Shai Tuttle and Malcolm Roach both did have flashes, specifically Malcolm Roach at the very beginning of the year. Not quite very beginning, just in weeks like 2 through 4, I think, or something like that. But he did show that he's a little bit vulnerable to just kind of getting washed out of plays, and neither of them are crazy pass rushers, so do I necessarily care about either of them going forward? No, but I do think they're both okay and do both justify more snaps going forward, especially if this team gets a little bit worse and is looking at some more young players. Sheldon Rankins, too, I skipped over. Also, B tier guy. Definitely good enough to be on your team and be starting for your team on a reasonably good defense. Now, he too does have, especially athletic limitations at this point, sideline to sideline. Now he's a defensive tackle. Is that a big deal? Of course not. But I do think the Saints are fine on the interior. As far as the edges go, so I already mentioned Cam Jordan. 2 big names here that are interesting this offseason, to say the least. Trey Andrickson, Marcus Davenport. Get Marcus Davenport first. Former first-round pick who has not lived up to that, but I do think, actually, he's somebody that, there are players like Cesar Ruiz I talked about on the other side of the ball who I'm kind of already over as far as being a legitimately useful NFL player. Marcus Davenport, I'm not. He does still show flashes of being a player who can legitimately win quickly off the line of scrimmage, even as a pass rusher, which, again, I mean, there are not very many players in the NFL who can do that at all, even against bad tackles, in terms of, like, doing it quick. Marcus Davenport can. And as a run defender, he still shows things, especially at his size. You can tell that he's learned some stuff from Cam Jordan, and he uses that size decently as a run defender. Is he great? No. And at this point in his career, I mean, we're not talking about a rookie or, whatever. I think it was his third year. I'm not crazy encouraged, but he's somebody I do think is at least worth, again, giving snaps to on a more significant basis. Trey Andrickson, on the other hand, he's fine. He's maybe a little bit better than fine. He does use his hands well, and he does play the run okay, but this is absolutely, I'll just warn any team right now that pays him, you shouldn't be. He didn't really create a ton by himself or almost anything outside of when he was playing some really, really awful tackles about midway through the season. But for example, the 4-sack game he had, those were almost exclusively caused by David Onyemata. If you just watch what happened on the plays, he tries hard. He's a high motor, what they say, and he's consistently moving throughout the play. And so I get it as far as I would like to have him on my team as a rotational guy. But if you're paying him expecting even 5 sacks in a year, you're probably just not probably. You are just wrong unless he gets the same type of help he got on the Saints defense, which unlikely. So that's my thoughts on Trey Andrickson. Don't want to get, again, they're definitely smart for not franchise tagging him, and they shouldn't pay him in free agency. Let some dumb team pay him because he's not going to give them what they expect for the contract he's going to get. At linebacker, that's kind of rough going forward. Mario Davis is still really good, but at this point, he's 32, 33, and while I like him a lot, his problem is speed and athleticism at this point, and that's just going to go down from here. Now, is it going to get awful? Probably not. I think he's going to be useful for at least a couple more years, but I'm not in love with him going forward. And there are other spots, not good. Alex Anzalone, not a disaster when he's on the field, but isn't somebody who helps your defense. He just doesn't, make you be awful, which is valuable, I suppose, but probably not what you're looking for. And K'Waun Alexander, who they inexplicably traded for midway through the year. There's a reason the 49ers gave him up out of the 3 they had, and it's because he was significantly worse than Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. And he just mentally, he reacts to the first thing he sees, goes way too quick and misses shit all the time. He misses a lot of tackles. He gets injured a lot. And when he's on the field, it's not like he's really good in pass coverage to make up for stuff. They should not be depending on him to give them a lot of snaps. Now, if he's your third linebacker, are you going to be like a disaster? No, I don't want to say he's a terrible player, but does he actually help your defense, especially over a large number of snaps? I would say pretty clearly not. So that's their second guy right now, right? Whether it's him or Anzalone, not a lot there. And they draft Zach Bond. And again, people talked about him as a potential first-round pick, and they did not. I don't know if they didn't use him well or if he just wasn't very good. It's hard to say. He didn't exactly play a lot, but when he's on the field, he kind of like Cesar Ruiz. Didn't show me anything that made me say, oh, yeah, he could be okay. He did some run fitting okay as far as like the mental side of it, but it's not like he was athletically, able to matter in those plays. Just being in the right place, while valuable. Again, if that's all your defenders do, you're going to end up giving up a lot of points. And Zach Bond didn't do anything besides that, really. Just take notice. So I'm worried about them linebackers going forward because that's all they have on the roster that's relevant, and that's not good enough. In the secondary, Saints are one of these teams. There are a lot of teams around the NFL that do this, that depend on really bad players that I guess they think are good. Is the only reason I can explain for them to continuously get snaps. Marshawn Lattimore is good. I'm not worried about him. While he can have a little bit of struggle, especially with the bigger-bodied. No, not with the bigger-bodied. Sorry, I was thinking of somebody else. With the quicker guys, which is an interesting quirk about him being a quick guy himself, because he covers, obviously, Mike Evans really, really well, and he can cover other types of guys, bigger-bodied guys. Even Julio he doesn't do an awful job on. But I'm not worried about him. On the other side, though, they just released Janoris Jenkins, which is fine at this point, especially given his age. I do think Janoris Jenkins played really well for them, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next place he goes, at least for a year or two, he's still pretty good. But, yeah, he had a large contract. I'm not going to trip about that. But that leaves them with some really bad players on roster. Patrick Robinson barely plays. He's injured so much at this point, and even when he does play, while he's okay, he's another defender. It doesn't really matter. And P.J. Williams and King Crowley are two of the worst corners in the entire NFL. P.J. Williams, he's a bottom 5 guy for sure, especially as a slot corner when they put him out there. I mean, if he's on the field, you can count on him to get burned constantly, and he really does. He lives up to that every time he plays. So that's an issue, and they talk about him like he's good, and you'll hear announcers in Saints games say a lot of things, and about him being a valuable backup. Not the case. That guy should not see the field in any meaningful capacity. That's how the Saints get. That's how the Saints kind of get blown out, or not blown out, but defensively burned a lot is through him. That applies to their safeties too. Marcus Williams, really good as a true center fielding safety. One of the actually probably top 3 of that specific skill set in the league. Really, really good. Actually matters there. But Malcolm Jenkins, horrible at this point as a pass defender. He's actually still reasonably valuable as a run guy, as a box safety, but as a pass defender, he is just horrible. I mean, they asked him to single cover Darren Waller early in the year when Darren Waller set some sort of record. I don't know if it was for the Raiders or for a tight end in general. He had like 15 catches for 210 yards. And while some people would say, Darren Waller's tough cover, not really. Not for good players. We see in games like the Patriots or some other games down the road. Darren Waller, not a technically gifted player at all. He's just fast. Which, I mean, hey, it's obviously really valuable. I don't want to shit on Darren Waller too much, but Malcolm Jenkins is theoretically supposed to be a player who can guard guys like that, and he really, really can't. And he couldn't through the whole year outside of these big, slow tight ends who anybody can cover effectively. So Malcolm Jenkins, not a valuable player at this point, despite how good he still is as a run defender. Just too bad in coverage to make up for that. And DJ Swearinger, I don't even think he's on the roster anymore, but he was an even worse version of that. I didn't mention Chauncey Garner-Johnson. I would talk about him. I do think is good. Bigger bodied slot guy again, and he actually does it in a really valuable way, whereas that can be issues for some players, especially against quicker guys. Chauncey Garner-Johnson, while does still have issues with quicker slot receivers, isn't going to get burned consistently. And when he plays, whether it's a tight end that goes out there or a lot of teams do utilize bigger receivers in the slot now, he can cover them really well. And especially in division with the Buccaneers, he's a really valuable guy because Bruce Arians moves Chris Godwin in the slot, and Garner-Johnson can cover him. So that's a valuable player. But overall, I mean, the Saints defense going forward, like I said, a lot of players who don't really matter, or the ones who do are getting older, and not a lot of young talent. So we'll see where they go going forward. But, I mean, listen, if the Saints don't fix their offense quick, you're probably going to see a lot of cracks with their defense going forward because it's not nearly as talented as a lot of people think. So Saints, a lot of work to do this offseason.